Today at the National Press Club, Treasurer Jim Chalmers. Mr Chalmers has delivered his fourth budget, with a focus on cost of living and building resilience amid international uncertainty. The budget comes just weeks out from the May election. Jim Chalmers with today's post-budget address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia for today's Westpac address. My name is Tom Connell. I'm the club's president and also host of Politics Now for Sky News. We gather here today for what I would say is an unusual budget, the fourth of the term, the first time, of course, since the 1940s. Also a budget that very few people in the building thought was going ahead when Parliament last sat in February, with an unmistakable last day of school vibe. The odd minister accidentally talking about the last week of Parliament. Perhaps the only thing missing was the paper shredders. In a very Canberra way, the first real sign the budget was back on began with a story during the rounds that knock-off time for Treasury officials shifted rather abruptly from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m, so perhaps a little bit of catch-up. Here we are, though, the final surprise of the budget. Income tax cuts have now set the scene for the May election. It will be largely fought on how tough households have done it for the past 3 years and what they have to look forward to. For those of you watching at home, you can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is Press Club Aust, or you can use the hashtag NPC. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers.
Well, here we are back again on Ngunnawal land, gathering at the kind invitation of Morris and the board, the sponsors and the members of the National Press Club. But since last time we gathered, not just one new president, but two, Trump and Connell. Congratulations, Tom, on your election, and thanks for your introduction. And I also pay tribute to your predecessor, Laura Tingle, who's here as well. And to everyone here, including the pundits, and let's face it, on recent form, probably a couple of protesters as well. Now, last night, as Tom rightly pointed out, was the first time since Ben Chifley was PM and Treasurer, more than 3/4 of a century ago, that there have been 4 budgets in a single parliamentary term. And of the 11 times that I've spoken here at the National Press Club, I think it's the 4 post-budget opportunities that I have cherished the most. Partly because Laura Chalmers comes along and is here again today. She brought Leo last night, and it means a lot to me to have her here. And also because these post-budget speeches offer us the chance to go behind the budget a bit, to provide a bit more of the colour and context. And today I wanted to do that. I want to talk about how our economy is turning a corner even as global conditions take a turn for the worse. I want to explain how seismic changes in the world validate and vindicate our strategy rather than undermine it. And I want to lay out our government's economic case for re-election, based on our progress to here, our plans from here, and the risks posed by our political opponents. But first, let me just sketch the backdrop a bit. 20 years ago now, I fronted up for the first of my 19 budget lockups. Peter Costello was the Treasurer, and the global economy was a very, very different place. And in the 2 decades since then, half a dozen subsequent Treasurers presided over 3 big economic shocks. The first, a financial crisis that became a demand shock. The second, a pandemic that became mostly a supply shock. The third, an inflationary shock that lingers around the world longer than anyone had hoped. Now, escalating trade tensions now risk, if not already represent, the 4th big economic shock in just 17 years. Now, if you think about the big post-war global economic story, from Bretton Woods in 1945 to the high inflation of the 1970s, you think about the Washington Consensus that held from the end of the Cold War until the beginning of the global financial crisis, there's a tendency to talk about economic shocks as punctuation, a break in the flow. But the last 20 years or so have proven that global shocks in one form or another are now chapters in their own right. They no longer interrupt the story, they are the story. So governing a country like ours in uncertain times like these is a responsibility that we accept, and it's an opportunity that we cherish, led by the Prime Minister, who is here again today, and I appreciate him coming along. Now, his collaborative style of leadership is appreciated by all of us in his team. Now, Katie Gallagher and I, we told the Cabinet yesterday that we consider ourselves really fortunate to have been so well supported by so many ministers, and I know that a number of them are here today, and I want to thank and acknowledge them again in front of all of you. And no Treasurer has ever been more fortunate than me when it comes to the Finance Minister, the best colleague that I have ever had. And nothing that we've done over the course of the last 4 budgets would have been possible without Katie Gallagher's calm and composure and her empathy and her judgment. Please put your hands together for Katie. Now, unusually, Katie came to the Treasury thank you dinner on Thursday night. I'm told that that's unprecedented to invite the Finance Minister, but for us, it's really not that unusual. I'm sure Katie would now agree that it's not the most glamorous of rituals. The pile of pide boxes and a sea of tired eyes sums up the week and the weeks before. But it does give us a chance to say thanks to Stephen Kennedy, Jenny Wilkinson, Glyn Davis today, and all the officials involved in putting this budget together. But back in the Treasury on Thursday night, we were reflecting with officials on the time that I was briefly working as a public servant, actually working for Glyn Davis in Queensland. Because Glyn was actually the first one to tell me what it actually looked like in the Cabinet room that we spend so much time in now in Parliament House, right down to the framed paintings or the pictures of Australian lorikeets, I think, on the walls. Now, those birds have seen and heard a lot over the years. Now, I'm told by the Cabinet Secretariat, and I shout them out too, wonderful people, I'm told that I've spent 664 hours in that Cabinet room this parliamentary term, which is about 27 continuous days. Whenever I'm in there, I try to remember that it's the birds in the frame or the galahs in the pet shop that really matter. We try to ensure that the conversations around that Cabinet table are shaped by the conversations that Australians are having around their own kitchen table. And we know that cost of living is front of mind for most Australians, and that's why it's been absolutely front and centre, not just in last night's budget, but really in all 4 of our budgets. And no matter how difficult or long the deliberations might be in that room, I'm always genuinely aware how lucky we are to be in there. And Treasurers stand there on budget night at the dispatch box on behalf of all who do so much to put our plans into budgets and into action. The ERC ministers who undertake the essential deliberations, I thank all of them. 233 of those 664 hours were with them in the Cabinet room. Every member of our caucus does so much to advocate for the people they represent. I acknowledge them too. But I wanted to particularly acknowledge at this point the staff from our offices, in my case, the wonderful staff in my office, led so ably by Claudia Crawford and Michael Quinlivan, the whole team, the team in Katie's office and Anthony's office and everyone associated from the ministerial teams, but also all of the public servants as well. And I wondered if you'd please join me in thanking them properly. Now, this budget makes it clear that the Australian economy is emerging from a global cost of living crisis in better shape than anyone else. Inflation is down, living standards are rising, real incomes are growing, unemployment is low, interest rates have started to come down, debt is down, and now growth is gathering pace and gathering momentum. And that combination is exceptional, but it's not accidental. It's the product of the choices that we have made together. Delivering cost of living relief for every Australian, strengthening Medicare and the services that people count on, and building a future made in Australia. Now, the 2 weeks leading into the budget made clear just how important and how urgent this work has been. The human and economic costs of Tropical Cyclone Alfred in my neck of the woods, coming so soon after the widespread flooding in North and far North Queensland, with more damaging heavy rains there just last week. And now, fresh turmoil in the world, part of this fourth shock that I'm describing. Now, all of this vindicates the course that we chose 3 years ago, and it validates the choices that we have made together, not just as a government, but as Australians more broadly. But I did want to particularly, in all of this, pay tribute to our Prime Minister. And I wanted to tell Australians that the leader that they see standing with emergency services workers in disasters brings the same decency to every challenge which confronts our nation. Anthony's leadership is defined by his compassion, his optimism, and also his determination. And he will make our case for re-election whenever the election is called to the Australian people with those same qualities and with that same commitment. And this election will be about the strong foundations that we have laid under his leadership, the better future that we are building together, and the risk of our opponents wrecking it all. It will be a referendum on Medicare. It will be a simple choice between Labor cutting taxes and helping with the cost of living, and Peter Dutton's secret cuts which will make Australians worse off, because he seems to want to cut everything except income taxes for workers. Above all else, this will be an election about the economy, and that's exactly what I want. Labor's economic case for a second term has three parts: the progress we've made together in the economy and repairing the budget, the work we are doing and the economic plan we are implementing to boost wages and rebuild living standards and make our economy more resilient, more competitive and more productive, and the deliberate threat and significant danger that the Coalition pose if they form the next government. Now, the economic progress documented in the budget last night belongs to every single Australian, and it's all the more remarkable against the backdrop of this extreme global economic uncertainty. To give you a sense of that progress, take inflation. In the most recent quarterly data, inflation sits at 2.4%, and just now, today's monthly reading has come out the same, 2.4% down again. On election night in May of 2022, inflation was more than double that and rising. So that when I stood here after our first budget in October that year, 2022, inflation was nearly triple what it is today. And in that first budget, we were talking about how far we had to go together. And today we can point to how far we have come. We have brought inflation down while encouraging a broader recovery in our economy, which is now well underway. Our fiscal policy helped break the back of inflation when it was at its peak. It adjusted to support growth and preserve employment as inflation came down. And we've delivered responsible cost of living relief that has directly taken some of the pressure off prices. And because of this, a soft landing is coming into view. It's looking more and more likely, with growth rebounding and living standards recovering and the private sector playing a bigger, welcome and encouraging role. The last financial year actually saw the highest level of business investment in over a decade. 4 in every 5 of the million jobs created have been in the private sector. 25,000 new businesses have been created each month this term, which is the highest average on record. Real wages and living standards are rising again, as I said, while the gender pay gap is at near record lows and unemployment still sits at around 4%. Now, Treasury expects employment growth this year will be stronger, inflation will come down faster, and participation will stay near its record high for longer, compared with the mid-year budget update only a few months ago. So our economy isn't just growing faster, it's growing in a way which will be stronger, more sustainable and more inclusive as well. All this while successfully steering towards a stunning improvement in our fiscal position. We inherited a mess in the budget and we are cleaning it up. The budget bottom line is $207 billion better off on our watch, the biggest ever nominal improvement in the budget in a single parliamentary term, turning $135 billion of Liberal deficits into surpluses worth $38 billion, the first back-to-back surpluses in almost 2 decades, almost halving the deficit we inherited for this financial year as well, and improving the budget position every year of the forward estimates compared to the pre-election outlook. Now, all of this is a deliberate result of our responsibility and our restraint, banking the vast majority of revenue upgrades, around 7 in every $10, restraining spending growth to 1.7% real spending growth, less than half the average of our predecessors, finding almost $95 billion of savings, more this term than our predecessors managed over their last 2 terms combined, with precisely zero savings in their last budget. Making real structural reform to secure the future of aged care and the National Disability Insurance Scheme, guaranteeing the choice and dignity and security that scheme brings to millions of Australians, and tackling high and rising interest costs as well. Now, just after coming to office, interest costs were forecast to grow by 14.4% per year. After 3 years of responsibility and restraint, we've managed to cut that to 9.5%. A big part of this story is our decision to return the vast majority of those revenue upgrades to the bottom line. Not only has this improved the budget position by around $250 billion to 2028, it means that we'll save $112 billion in interest payments over the medium term as a consequence. Now, we don't see the substantial progress that we've made in the budget as an end in itself. Repairing the budget and rebuilding living standards go hand in hand, and our responsible approach has made room for what are the 5 main essential elements of last night's budget: helping with the cost of living, strengthening Medicare, building more homes, investing in every stage of education, and making our economy stronger, more productive and more resilient. These are the essential components of our economic plan, and you saw them in the budget last night. These plans are all about strengthening our resilience in uncertain times to create that more dynamic and more competitive economy, and to rebuild incomes and living standards as well. There'll be a whole bunch of colleagues who'll have to go and vote now. Now, in this budget, we're delivering more cost of living relief for Australians when it's needed, extending energy bill relief, funding wage increases for care workers, making medicines cheaper, relieving student debt, and lowering taxes for every Australian taxpayer. Now, the combined benefit for an average household will be more than $15,000 from our 3 rounds of tax cuts and energy bill relief alone. Substantial relief when in combination, while also building the earning capacity of Australians for the future as well, by improving access to education so that every Australian gets the chance to work in the jobs of the future, by investing in Medicare and expanding bulk billing, minimising out-of-pocket health costs and time out of work, and by moving towards universal early childhood education so that parents can work more and earn more if they want to. Now, these parts of our plan to rebuild living standards are distinct but deliberately interlinked. Take our tax cut top-up, a modest but meaningful addition to the tax cuts that we're rolling out already. The average annual tax cut after this year's and next year's is $2,548 or about $50 a week, all 3 of the stages combined. Our tax cuts will boost incomes by 1.9% within 2 years. They will support the private sector recovery. They'll increase participation by more than 1.3 million hours, with Treasury estimating that 900,000 of these hours will be taken up by women. And it will give people a better start in their careers, with the average young worker receiving a tax cut more than twice what they would have received under the Coalition. So our tax cuts provide immediate relief while also boosting participation and aspiration and Australians' long-term earning potential as well. Now, the focus on improving living standards is a big part of this budget because it's the fundamental mission of our government, creating opportunities and helping people seize them in a world of churn and change. We can't undo or ignore the big shift from globalisation to fragmentation, which is playing out before us, but we can determine how we respond. And that's what A Future Made in Australia is all about. It's a pro-trade agenda that puts a premium on private sector investment. It rejects self-sabotaging tariffs and trade barriers, protectionism and isolationism. It focuses on how we shore up critical supply chains and become indispensable to new ones. And this is critical to the jobs of the future, and it's vital to managing all of this uncertainty now as well. $30 billion of projects in sectors like green hydrogen, critical minerals and clean energy manufacturing have been proposed or are already in development. And our plan is to build on this progress, improving our resilience by unlocking our competitiveness. So in this budget, we're facilitating more private investment in renewable energy, our fundamental comparative advantage in the new net zero economy. We're funding research in clean energy technology manufacturing and low-carbon liquid fuels so that we can commercialise Australian innovations. And we're making big investments in green metals, leveraging our traditional strengths in resources to build new opportunities. So a future made in Australia, powered by cleaner and cheaper energy, positions us as an essential part of the global economy. And this will be critical to our growth prospects. But it's not the only part of our growth agenda. We know the foundations of future success start with more competitiveness and a more productive economy as well. That's why we're reforming the payments system, our financial market infrastructure, our approvals processes, our foreign investment framework and more. And it might be unusual to keep the wheels of economic reform turning in a pre-election budget, but that's what we're doing in last night's budget. First, by banning non-compete clauses for most workers, and second, by creating a national licensing scheme for electrical occupations. And we're proud of these changes because they show that the way to increase competition and productivity in our economy isn't with scorched earth industrial relations or making Australians work longer for less. It's with policy that boosts competition and boosts wages and boosts our workforce at the same time. So this is a budget that's pro-worker, it's pro-growth and it's pro-competition. Our reform to non-competes will remove a handbrake on competition and a speed bump to aspiration. Most workers will no longer need a lawyer to get a better paying job. They won't need permission from their old boss to become their own boss. Instead, we're empowering them to move jobs and earn more and start businesses if they want to. And this could add an estimated $5 billion annually to our economy. At the same time as average wages for those freed from these restrictions could increase by up to $2,500 a year. We're also boosting competition and backing workers with a new occupational licensing regime for electricians. Requiring electricians to get a new licence every time they want to work interstate is unnecessary and it's costly red tape. We're making sure that a Sparky on the Tweed doesn't need a different licence for a job in Coolangatta. Broader licensing reform could lift GDP by up to $10 billion a year, which is why this change will be a template for future reform as well. So our progress to here and our plan for what's ahead make up two parts of our economic case for re-election. The third is the risk that all of this could be undone by a coalition government. Now, usually at this point in budget week or in the electoral cycle, you would set some basic tests for your opponents, but on this occasion, I think it's fair to say they've already failed them. The coalition has put forward, and I'm quoting, the weakest policy offering from an opposition in living memory, according to one industry source. They either don't have a clue or they won't come clean. But what looks like slapstick comedy from the outside actually masks a more sinister intent. And we know this because Angus Taylor has told us and the coalition's position on key issues has shown us. Now, Angus and I don't agree on much, but to give credit where it's due, I thought he made a really insightful point recently when he said that the best predictor of future performance is past performance. And in a dramatic break from usual coalition internals, Peter Dutton backed him in. Now, on this, both of them are absolutely right. Their past performance is no surpluses, more waste and rorts and more debt. Their past performance is Middle Australia missing out with real wages in reverse and living standards falling fast. Their past performance is much higher and rising inflation. Their past performance is Peter Dutton's attacks on Medicare. But it's not just their record in government that reveals their priorities and what they would do if elected. Their recent record in opposition makes it very clear as well that Australians would be worse off under Peter Dutton. And when he cuts, Australians will pay. Cutting cost of living help is the only motivation that seems to bind together this particular coalition clown show. They've opposed cuts to student debt, they've opposed energy bill relief, they've opposed cheaper early childhood education and cheaper medicines, they've opposed more homes and they've opposed more urgent care clinics. And today, they voted for higher taxes on Australian workers. It beggars belief that a Liberal Shadow Treasurer can recommend to his party and walk into the parliament and vote for higher taxes on Australian workers, but that's what happened today. So Australians would be much worse off if Peter Dutton had his way, and they will be much worse off still if he wins. And I think that brain snap from Angus Taylor on tax makes that crystal clear. It means that this parliamentary term finishes the same way it started, Labor helping Australians with the cost of living and Peter Dutton and the coalition trying to prevent it. The Liberals and Nationals have now opposed in one way or another 3 tax cuts 3 times in 3 years. And instead of working with us to help Australians, they've got secret plans to harm them. Peter Dutton says that he will make hundreds of billions of dollars in cuts, but he won't tell Australians where those cuts are coming from. And there's only one reason for that, and people should know about it. And that's because the coalition can't find the $600 billion they need to fund their nuclear reactors without coming after Medicare once again. And so the point that I'm making is really this. When the Australian economy is turning a corner and the global economy is taking a turn for the worse, we can't afford to turn back, not when so little is known about the alternative. Now, I know that this tradition today is as much about the questions from the working journalist as it is about the Treasurer's address, and so let me just share a few final, broader observations. There are familiar rituals and rhythms to budget week, and even after 20 years you can still get caught up in them. But a budget is never about 1 week, it's never about 5 weeks. It's overwhelmingly a program for the years ahead. And that's what ours is. But it also makes the economic case for our re-election. More than that, it spells out our plan for action to build on the progress that Australians have made together. Now, it's probably fair to say that over the years and out in the suburbs, there's been a flattening of expectations of what we can achieve in this place through economic policy making, and perhaps a narrowing of our collective sense that political leadership can make a real and tangible difference in people's lives. Now, every one of us here has reason to reflect on our role in that, but also whether we can turn that around. Because Australians should be proud of all that we have achieved together. We are genuinely on the cusp of something truly extraordinary in our economy, but something prevents us from saying so. And maybe that's because of Australians' natural streak of humility. Maybe it's after years of crisis we've trained ourselves to brace for the next one. Maybe it's the erosion of trust in institutions that we see here and around the world, something that Australia has so far managed to avoid the most extreme fallout from. But a big part of it as well is undoubtedly because people are still under pressure. We get that. Because while we have every reason to be optimistic about the future, we understand that this can often run ahead of how people are feeling and faring. For many Australians, the pressures of the past few years, perhaps the last 2 decades, have been substantial. So let me just say again, we don't just acknowledge that, we're doing something about that. And you saw that again in the budget last night. Yes, inflation is coming down, real wages are up. Unemployment is low, interest rates have started coming down, the economy is bouncing back. But for many people, the gap between working hard and getting ahead still needs eliminating. And that's why there's more work for us to do. It's why our focus isn't confined to the national numbers, as important as they are. Because this budget is about more than turning the corner. It's about where we go next. Not just putting the worst behind us, but seizing what's in front of us as well, in this new world of uncertainty, creating a new generation of prosperity that is stronger because it's more inclusive, in the better future that we are going to build together. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Treasurer. And just for those watching the broadcast, it wasn't a mass walkout of Labor MPs, it was a division. So that's the reason you saw a few of them exit briefly. You mentioned the voters at the kitchen table, and that's what the budget's really about. Before the last election, they were told by Labor power bills would be lower by $275 by the end of the term. This time around, I'm wondering what you can assure them. So excluding any rebates and even setting the bar much lower, can you assure them that any increase in power prices won't totally eat up the income tax cut you announced last night?
Well, I will assure people that we are doing everything we can to put downward pressure on electricity prices, and that takes a number of forms. In the near term, extending energy bill relief is about taking some of the sting out of those electricity bills. That's an important part of the cost of living help that was in the budget last night. And we know from the first two rounds of energy bill relief that that has been helpful, that has been meaningful, it's been effective in limiting increases to power bills. In fact, better than that, in the official CPI last year, the year to December 2024, electricity prices came down about 25%, largely but not entirely because of our rebates. And so in the near term, rebates have got an important role to play. But in the medium term and in the longer term, we are adding more cleaner and cheaper, more reliable sources of energy to the grid. And over time that will put downward pressure on prices as well. We know from AEMO and from the experts that one of the reasons why we've had this upward pressure is not the new parts of the system, not the cleaner, cheaper, more reliable energy that we are adding to the system, but the legacy parts of the system, which is becoming less reliable over time. And so we're doing those two things at once. We know that electricity bills are part of the cost of living pressure that people have felt over the last 4 or 5 years. There's good reason for that, international reasons in particular. But we're doing what we can in the near term and in the longer term simultaneously.
First question from the floor, David Spears from ABC.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you, Treasurer, for the address today. I just wanted to go to the migration figures that came out the other day. They showed net overseas migration had come down to 380,000. Your budget says next financial year that'll fall to 260,000, and then after that down to 225,000 for the next few years beyond that. How will that drop be achieved? And given Peter Dutton is suggesting that he'll go further, is that possible or even desirable from your point of view?
Well, first of all, it's not clear to me what Peter Dutton is saying. He's made an announcement, walked it back and then denied that he walked it back, and so let's see what he says about that tomorrow night. More substantially, what you're seeing in those migration numbers which you refer to is we are expecting the continuation of what has been now a very clear trend. We had the post-COVID spike in migration as those numbers recovered, and we have been managing that down over time to the levels that you rightly identify from the budget last night. The forecasts for net overseas migration in the budget last night were largely what they were in the mid-year update. One year had 5,000 more, the next year had 5,000 less, or vice versa. So broadly the status quo. That is a combination of two things. It's part of the normalising of the scheme after we had that big post-COVID spike, and it's also partly because of the efforts that we have put into managing those levels. Now, what I've tried to do, I think I've done it in this room in front of all of you before, but on every occasion, yourself, David, and others have asked me, you know, we want to make sure that we manage down net overseas migration and do that in a considered and a methodical way, which recognises that there are genuine economic needs for migration as well. You won't solve, for example, a housing shortage without sufficient workers, mostly by training the workers, but also there's a role for migration. And so we're managing it down to more normal levels. We're doing it in a considered and a methodical way. There's a role for migration in our economy. And I think the best way to set migration policy is not to really try and dial up the division like our political opponents try and do.
Michelle Grattan from The Conversation.
Michelle Grattan, The Conversation. Treasurer, you've emphasised in your speech a number of times global shocks and disruption that we're seeing, and we may see another round of that disruption next week when President Trump presents his new tariff policy. Given those rapidly changing circumstances, would you be willing later in the year to have an economic statement, a major economic statement, to take account of new circumstances so that this budget is not a set and forget document?
Well, there are a couple of important points in your question, Michelle. One of them takes the outcome of the election for granted, and you won't hear me doing that. We've got a relatively major event between now and then where the people get to decide who governs them in the second half of the year. But your broader point, I think, is well understood, and your broader point is this, that the big story of the budget, the big story of the global economy and our own economy is this dark shadow which is being cast by escalating trade tensions, which are very concerning to us, but also the slowdown in China, a war in Eastern Europe, a collapsing ceasefire in the Middle East, political uncertainty in other parts of the developed world. And so all of that does create an element of heightened uncertainty in the global economy. And the budget's really designed to provision for that, to allow for that, to anticipate that, and to make sure that we are well prepared and well placed to deal with this economic uncertainty which is coming at us. And the best insurance policy for Australia are the two essential elements of the budget last night, which is to rebuild incomes and living standards at the household level, make sure that household budgets are more resilient, and we're making very substantial progress there. The tax cuts are a part of that story. But secondly, to make our economy more resilient overall, more competitive, but also to make sure it's more resilient. Because the big story of the budget is dealing with those two pressures at once, cost of living and global economic uncertainty. And the combination of measures, the calibration of those measures in the budget are really about responding to that. You asked me if there'll be an economic statement later in the year. Again, I don't take the outcome of the election for granted, but what we have shown is a willingness to be nimble with our economic policy, to play the cards that we're dealt and try and make sure that Australians are beneficiaries, not victims, of all of that churn and change.
Mark Riley from Network 7.
Treasurer, thanks for your address. Today and in your interviews yesterday, many times you said that this budget is about building up Medicare and the election campaign will be about protecting Medicare. And there's a lot of money in there for Medicare, bulk billing and urgent care clinics and also the price of medicines. But I want to ask you about the biggest omission in Medicare since its inception. That's still an omission, and that's dental care. That can be absolutely life-changing for people who cannot afford to go and see a dentist, low-paid Australians, elderly Australians. It can literally keep them alive. I'm wondering if Labor will at least start a conversation to have some level of care covered by Medicare so Australians can get their teeth fixed.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, I think this is a crucial question. You know, how do we continue to strengthen Medicare to make sure that it's responsible and it's affordable and sustainable, but also make sure that it's delivering the kind of care that people need? And obviously, you know, very good people, including people in the room today I can see around this hall, have suggested to us and lobbied for us and advocated for us to do that. And the answer to that question is the same answer to the question about a lot of things that we would love to do. We've got to make sure that we can afford it and make sure that there's room for it in the budget. In this budget, the big priority is incentivising more bulk billing and women's health. But that's not to say that in some future budget under a government of either political persuasion that we might be able to find room for this. I know from my own community that dental health has a direct link to health more broadly in the same way that mental health does. And you know, any good government from budget to budget will try and work out if they can do more.
Next question, Phil Curry from the AFR.
Thank you, Tom. Treasurer. Can I just sort of question you on your view about the budget bottom line improving since you're elected, and you often go back to the anchor point, which is the Treasury assessment known as PFO, released during the campaign. So if we go back to the 22 campaign where Labor was elected, Treasury, probably a little bit spooked by events in Ukraine and COVID, forecast a deficit that year of $79.8 billion. The actual deficit that year turned out to only be 31.9. Which was 1.4% of GDP. Last night you forecast a deficit for next year of 42 billion, which is 1.5% of GDP. Isn't it the case from then to now the bottom line is worsening?
It's the case that on the 7 years that we've been responsible for, There's been the biggest ever nominal improvement in the budget we've ever seen, $207 billion. And that's partly because we turned 2 of those big deficits into 2 surpluses, and we shrunk the deficit this year. And we've shown in all 4 of our budgets an element of restraint when it comes to real spending growth and banking upward revision to revenue and finding $95 billion worth of savings. Now, obviously, I read what you wrote the other day about the anchor point that we've chosen. I don't think that there is a different, more rational anchor point to choose than the assessment of the books when we came to office, put together by non-political, professional forecasters in the Treasury and in the Finance Department. And I know that there's an appetite. I'm not accusing you of this, Phil, but certainly our political opponents, there's an appetite to try and rewrite that time. You know, they try and pretend away the fact that spending as a share of the economy was up near 1/3 of the economy. We got it down closer to 1/4 of the economy. That's progress. And I know that all of these questions come from a good place, and the good place that all of these questions come from is recognition that Katie and I share, and our whole Cabinet, our Expenditure Review Committee, and understanding that we share, that even with all of the progress we've made, cleaning up the mess that we found in the budget, we do acknowledge that there's more work to do. You know, in every budget there's been savings, in every budget there's been an element of restraint. It goes back to Mark's question. Every minister in this room has come to us with more good ideas that we can fund, but we've tried to be as responsible as we can, and as a consequence of that, we've made more progress in a single parliamentary term improving the budget than any government ever has.
Next question, Claire Armstrong from News Corp.
Thanks, Treasurer, for your speech. You've often said since becoming Treasurer that you believe Australians understand the need to have tough adult conversations about the economy. You said yesterday that it was economics, not politics, front of mind when you were putting this budget together. If those things are the case, why not use the opportunity to go further to address the structural deficit issues in the budget, take it to an election within weeks and get a mandate? Or is it the case that because of the cost of living crisis, Australians are just not ready for that adult conversation?
I think one of the defining characteristics of the way that Katie and Anthony and I have spoken to Australians about the economy over the course of the last 3 years is to err on the side of frankness. And even in the last little bit of my speech today, what I tried to say to people was to say that we understand that even with this progress we're making in the aggregate numbers, we know that there's still pressures there and we're trying to help deal with them. And where that relates to the specific part of your question about budget repair, you know, in every budget, and 4 of these now and the budget updates, you have to strike the best balance you can between budget repair, helping with the cost of living and investing in the future. And that's what we've tried to do, to strike that most effective balance we can. We get a lot of free advice from budget to budget. There have been people, including people in this room, who've told us we have to burn the budget to the ground, and that would be the best economic policy that would have sent us into recession. We know that now. That's actually a fact. And so how that relates to the structural position of the budget is we've actually made more structural progress in the budget than most people recognise. You know, I pay tribute here to Bill Shorten, who's left the parliament, but to Amanda Rishworth as well. The progress that we're making on the NDIS, making sure that we're providing a standard of care that people need and deserve in a way that is more sustainable. One of the big features of the budget last night on the spending side was actually that we're making better progress on the NDIS than we anticipated. That's a structural fix. Aged care, and I'm not sure if Annika Wells is here and Mark Butler, but the work that they did on aged care is transformational in terms of the budget position, the structural position, and what we've done with interest costs as well. So those 3 changes are making a big structural difference to the budget. But again, to your question, Claire, and Phil's before you, you know, we don't pretend that even with all this progress on budget repair, we don't pretend that the job is finished. One of the reasons we're asking Australians respectfully for another term of government, another term in government, is because we know that there's more work to do.
Next question, Andrew Clennell from Sky News.
Here's another question from a good place, Treasurer. I just wanted to read you a couple of quotes and see if you can identify who said this. That deficit of vision has reduced the budget to a $100 billion missed opportunity, a budget that borrows big and spends big, but thinks small, a budget that delivers generational debt without the generational dividend, $1 trillion in debt and growing, deficits as far as the eye can see, but barely anything else designed to survive beyond the election. Then there was this. These guys wouldn't know the fiscal levers from a selfie stick. That's a good one. Always the phony photo op with these guys,
I like the sound
always
of this guy.
about them. And you can exist like that in politics, and maybe for a period of time you can succeed. And that's the biggest risk in this budget. Instead of laying out an economic vision, the government focuses on managing political perception. Both of those were said by Jim Chalmers in May 2021. You've just delivered a budget which forecasts a decade of deficits. $1 trillion debt, the next 4 deficits of $179 billion. My question, Treasurer, is do you feel like a hypocrite today?
No, of course not, because central to the budget last night was an economic vision for the long term. Building Australia's future was a key element of the budget. Building a future made in Australia, investing in every single stage of education, which will pay intergenerational dividends long after any of us are still here. So the budget is long on vision. It's also long on recognising that people are under pressure and we've got responsibilities to them. And when you mention the fiscal position this year, you mentioned the $1 trillion of debt which we inherited from our predecessors. We are at $940 this year. That's a lot of debt. But it was supposed to be $177 billion higher without our efforts, and that's saving Australians on interest costs. And so I appreciate the opportunity that you have given us to remember and reflect on what we inherited when we came to office. And we have deliberately and decisively taken a very different approach to our predecessors. Their budget was weighed down by waste and rorts and missed opportunities, and what we've done is we've invested in the future of this country, building more homes, investing in lifelong learning, strengthening Medicare. And these are legacy items that we will leave behind whenever we finish up in this place.
If you think back to where you were in 2022 and now, with no surpluses for the decade, was that the plan?
Well, you've deliberately ignored there, Tom, 2 surpluses that we delivered. When we came to office, there were no surpluses, and there were only deficits, and we turned 2 of them into surpluses. I do think, you'd expect me to say this, maybe Katie will agree with me, we do think that is too easily dismissed and too easily diminished. We wouldn't have had those 2 surpluses if we'd not taken the responsible approach to banking and saving and the spending restraint that we have shown. And so let's not lightly dismiss those 2 surpluses. They're hard to get. We haven't seen back-to-back surpluses in this country for almost 2 decades. So let's not try and whitewash that from the history. That's part of our record and we're proud of it. And it's meant that there's a structural benefit too, because those 2 surpluses and the smaller deficit this year is paying dividends for us in the form of lower interest repayments.
David Crowe from the SMH and The Age.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks, Treasurer, for your speech and for the Q&A. On the top-up tax cuts, once they're fully in place, they cost $7.4 billion a year, each and every year, because they go to so many workers. But there's no saving of $7.4 billion a year in that year when they start at that scale. So they're unfunded. Why is that? Did you think you didn't need to fund them by finding savings to offset the tax revenue foregone?
Well, first of all, as we've said on a number of occasions, we've found $95 billion in savings over the course of our 4 budgets. I'd say again, and I hope I'm not labouring this point, it's pretty unusual for there to be billions of savings in a budget which everybody knows is on the eve of an election. That's unusual. There weren't any savings in the March 22 budget. So we are continuing to find savings. And as Katie said more eloquently than I do, the best way to think about budget repair is not in any one specific moment or in time, but the progress that we've made over 4 budgets. And that $207 billion improvement in the budget is about making room for these sorts of things, which are tax cuts, cost of living relief and investments in Medicare.
But is that double counting? Because sure, yes, you've made previous savings over this term of parliament, but that doesn't necessarily give you a new saving to fund a new initiative. And here you've lost tax revenue, you've foregone the tax revenue without any additional saving to cover that cost. The
$207 billion improvement in the budget is net of those investments that we're making in the tax cuts, in addition to the tax cuts that we are providing. Now, we think it's a very important, very worthy objective to return bracket creep where you can and do it the most responsible, cost-effective, efficient way that you can, and that's what the tax cuts represent. They are modest in isolation but substantial in combination with the rest of the tax cuts and the rest of the cost of living help. And they come in conjunction with, at the same time as we're making this history-making improvement in the budget more broadly. They are net of that. They are in addition to that.
Next question, Anna Henderson from SBS.
Thank you, Treasurer. In terms of what's been announced so far in the lead up to this election, we've seen many billions in spending measures and not so much on the savings side. Will you commit that before the election you'll reveal any additional savings that Labor would plan to make if it returned to government? It won't be something people find out from a budget document if you're re-elected.
Well, what we've made clear last night in our budget is that's our economic plan. And if there are additional savings to be made, we'll detail them at the appropriate time.
Before the election?
Well, if we've decided them before the election, we'll reveal them before the election. But let's not forget, I mean, the budget is not 20 hours old yet. The best sense of what we plan to do in the economy is what's in the budget. A couple of $1 billion of savings already. It's normal in the course of an election campaign for there to be subsequent announcements and subsequent decisions taken, and we'll outline them in the usual way.
Next question comes from Matthew Cranston from The Australian.
Welcome back, Matt.
Thanks, Treasurer. Thanks for the
I usually see Matthew in the foyer of the IMF building in Washington, DC. It's nice to have you home.
Thanks for the free cup of coffee. But I think the public are probably a little bit more concerned about how much tax they're going to be paying when they're 55. So I went back through some of the budgets, went to your first budget and added up all the extra tax upgrades, tax revenue upgrades you've got from the first budget to this one. It comes to about $392 billion. So in that first budget, you also predicted that fiscal 26 deficit would be $42 billion. Last night, $42 billion. So that means that over those 4 years, you've had this extra, unexpected $400 billion worth of tax revenue, and yet you haven't been able to reduce that fiscal year deficit. So I mean, the general voting public wouldn't know those figures. So my question to you is, why are you exploiting the lack of awareness from the voting public about where and how all that extra tax revenue you've got is being spent, not saved?
Okay. Well, there are a few elements to that. Let me pull out the most important ones. What matters when you get these revenue upgrades in the budget, and they were more substantial at the start of our term than they were in the budget last night. There was quite a small revenue change in the budget we put out last night. What matters is what you do with those upgrades. And very, very unusual in historical terms. You want to make comparisons with the past. We've banked most of those upward revisions to revenue. Our predecessors used to spend most of them. In fact, we've banked, I think, 7 in every $10 over the course of our government, and that's because we recognise that one way we can get the budget in better shape, and one way we have been getting the budget in better shape, is to bank those upward revisions to revenue. So I think if you are going to quote that big number that you've quoted, that the Liberal Party uses as well, you need to recognise...
That's my number.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, I'm not saying you got it from them, I'm saying it's similar. You have to recognise that we've banked 7 in every 10 of those dollars, and that's because we understand the important role that plays in budget repair.
All right, but I suppose the question then is, you've still got 30% that the public don't realise that, that's being spent, not saved.
Well, in every budget you make a series of decisions about revenue and about investments in the future and cost of living help, and in this case, tax cuts. It is historically unusual for a government to bank 70% almost of these upward revisions to revenue. As I said, our predecessors, not just our immediate predecessors, but the Howard government as well, they used to spend almost all of it. We've saved the vast majority of it, almost 3/4 of it.
Next question, Andrew Probran from the Nine Network.
Treasurer, I want to ask you about tobacco excise. Over the past 5 years, Treasury thought that you'd raised something like $77 billion and is now under $50 billion. Somewhat of a public policy disaster, given that smoking hasn't really shifted in rates in recent years. and you've got a bit of a triple disaster in a bottom line falling out of tobacco, which was once the fourth biggest revenue source, health outcomes not shifting, and the creation of a multi-billion-dollar industry for organised crime. So my question is, what consideration has been given to reducing tobacco excise to attack the financial incentive that's so attractive for crime gangs?
Yeah. Look, we'd rather give tax relief to every Australian taxpayer than to provide tax relief for smoking. We don't think that's the best way to go about this problem that we acknowledge. There is a very big, very substantial problem in the budget when it comes to tobacco excise. I've been very upfront about that. There are two ways that tobacco excise comes down. One's a very good way and one's a very bad way. The very good way is more people give up the darts. We want that. The bad way is that more people avoid the tax, and we are seeing in organised crime and in other ways there has been an increase in that kind of often violent tax evasion. And so what we've done in the budget, recognising and acknowledging that problem, there is a very serious problem in the budget when it comes to that revenue line, is we invest another $157 million in enforcement and compliance. We think that's a better way to collect more revenue in recognition and in acknowledgement of that problem. There was also $188 million in resourcing for compliance and enforcement, I think, in January of 2024. So we know we've got a problem there. We know we've got to do something about it. We're not convinced that by cutting taxes for smoking that we'll get the objective that we want. We think the better way is to invest in enforcement, and that's what we're doing.
Laura Tingle from the ABC.
Thanks, Tom. Treasurer, you've said one of the priorities in the budget is about lifting the productive capacity of the economy. And you've also talked about the importance of small business. That's something that the Coalition is clearly focused on. I just wondered if you could clarify for us the status of the instant asset write-off. As I understand it, if legislation that's already before the Parliament isn't extended by the time we leave here this week, it will, the write-off level will revert to $1,000 for smaller businesses. What's your plan for that, and what's your plan for the future with the instant asset write-off?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. The extension for the instant asset write-off that we've already budgeted for has been held up in the Parliament. I think that's frankly shameful that that's been held up. It's been held hostage to some Senate shenanigans. And so we want to see that passed. We're talking with the crossbench about that right now, and I don't want to drop them in it, but I've had a conversation with a crossbencher this morning about it. We know that it's an issue in case we run out of parliamentary runway. We want to see that extended. That's been our goal all along. We've tried to pass it through the Parliament. Katie will have a better sense of the Senate mechanics. She speaks fluent Senate, I don't. But that's been held up. So we want to see that passed. And as the Prime Minister indicated earlier today, we'll have more to say about the future of the instant asset write-off in addition to that. But we want to do the right thing by Australia's small businesses. We think it's a great thing that something like 25,000 new businesses have been created on average every month, the life of our government, which is a record. We're doing what we can to support them: energy bill relief, this instant asset write-off, supporting the hospitality sector with a tax break, extending the unfair trading practice protections for small business, strengthening the ACCC to level the playing field, what we're doing in mergers and acquisitions. That's all about supporting small business, and we'd like to pass the instant asset write-off as part of that too.
Next question, Ben Westcott from Bloomberg.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks for your speech, Treasurer. In just over a week from today, it's Liberation Day in the US, when US President Donald Trump will announce his new tariff regime. I just wanted to check, in advance of that, and just now Donald Trump has said that there will be very limited exemptions to the tariffs that are due to come into place. In advance of that day, have you had any conversations with your counterpart? Has the government had any conversations with the Trump administration to try and secure one of those exemptions? And have you been given any guarantees?
No is the answer to the last part of your question. We take no outcome or no option for granted, but we are engaging, as you would expect us to. Wherever we can, we're engaging. And we're speaking up for and standing up for Australia's interests. You know, there are two kinds of concern associated with these escalating trade tensions for us. The direct impact on our industries and workers and businesses, obviously a big concern. We want to make sure that we don't trade away or give away the sorts of things that we cherish. The PBS is obviously a good example of that. But more broadly as well, these escalating trade tensions are a very substantial concern. You know, trade tensions, as you know, and as your news organisation knows, risk higher inflation and slower growth at a time when the world's just coming to the good end of these inflationary pressures, and we've had a period and we expect a period of slow growth. And so growth's not been thick on the ground and inflation's been a challenge, and so we don't want to see these escalating trade tensions make things worse. We'll continue to engage where we can. We'll continue to speak up and stand up for Australia's interests, and I'm sure that the outcome of President Trump's deliberations will be known before long.
Katina Curtis from the West Australian.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Treasurer.
I don't know about that front page today, Katina, with
what have you
me
got
as the
against
Nirvana cover was a bit confronting. So,
I think it's fair to say there's been an increasing drumbeat of calls for broader tax reform. The tax cuts, top-up tax cuts, haven't met the mark for most people in terms of that. And probably picking up on your earlier comments about reforms that Claire referenced, do you think that in order to bed down proper big reforms for the Australian economy, we need 4-year terms in Parliament? And would you put that to the people?
Well, first of all, I've always, for as long as I can remember, I've thought 4-year fixed terms would be better than 3-year variable terms. That sounds like something Anthony and Westpac would say, but I've always been a believer in 4-year fixed terms. I can't imagine that we would put that to a referendum ahead of some of the other referenda options that are available to us, and so I don't want to say where that belongs in the queue. That would be better for long-term economic decision-making. I don't think anybody seriously contests that. What I would contest, respectfully, Katina, is this idea that 3-year terms prevents economic reform. You know, I said before that it's unusual in a pre-election budget to have billions of dollars of savings. It's also unusual in a pre-election budget to have proper, genuine, serious economic reform. And here I shout out my colleague and my mate over here, Andrew Lee, because we've been working on this non-competes clause for a while now. I salute him and his work, his commitment. I see Danielle over there. We've been working with the PC and some of these other economic reforms like occupational licensing in the electrical trades. You know, these are ways that we can keep the reform wheels turning, even in the context of 3-year parliamentary terms.
Did you like any of the front pages?
Next question.
Final question that might get a better answer. Jacob Steinman from AAP.
Thanks, Treasurer, for your address. Jacob Steinman from AAP.
Hi.
Your extra tax cuts in this budget essentially just give back 2 years' worth of bracket creep to income earners. As spending increases, income earners will face an increasingly large share of the tax burden as a result of bracket creep. Why not just index the tax brackets to save us having to do this every 2 years?
Well, because we've got to make the budget add up, and most countries in the OECD, they don't index the tax brackets. I know it's a suggestion put forward by good people. Good, well-motivated people say that we should do that. We're not considering that. There are good reasons to index parts of our economic armoury, social security and the like. But we've found a different, I think, better way to return bracket creep now 3 times. We're cutting taxes for every Australian taxpayer 3 times, last year, next year and the year after. And one of our big motivations there is returning bracket creep, but also doing it in the way where we get the most economic bang for buck. Now, you can see the Treasury analysis in the budget papers last night, really about the participation impacts, in terms of labour hours, in terms of women's workforce participation. We think we're going to get a lot of economic bang for buck for those tax cuts, as modest as they are. And so that's our preferred approach. We know that there are other approaches out there, but we've got to make it all add up. We've got to make it all balance out with all of these other considerations that we have.
We've got our own budget bottom line at the Press Club. Would you agree to a debate with the Shadow Treasurer that'll be packed out, I'm sure?
Yeah, I would love to do that. You know, Josh Frydenberg and I did that in the last election. You know, Josh deserves the credit for agreeing to that. I thought it was a useful opportunity. He enjoyed it, I enjoyed it, and we got a lot out of it. And so I would have thought Angus Taylor could front up to the Press Club and have a debate. I've actually written to Angus with all of the requests that we've received for debates. I think there's probably 10 different requests for debates. I would happily debate him at least weekly during the election campaign. I mean that seriously. I think that would be a good thing. And a lot of you have put forward suggestions about the best forum for that. If there's a neutral forum, an appropriate forum, we should do it. I made myself available for Q&A on Monday night to do an economic debate. Unfortunately, he declined that opportunity, and that's for him to explain why he did that. But I would certainly be very, very happy to fulfil what I think should be an obligation on a Treasurer, to front up to the National Press Club and to do an economic debate, and I hope he agrees to your kind invitation.
I'm sure he's watching, so there we go. We thank you for your time today. Try to contain your excitement as you get another Press Club membership.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Jim Chalmers.